YouTube, it's time for another top 10. Yes, today, folks, is a video that's been in the works for quite some time. I think this is one of my most requested videos, hands down. Today, I will be talking about my top 10 Stephen King books of all time. The reason this video has been postponed for so long is because at the time the requests for this video started rolling in, I didn't feel like I had read enough Stephen King to justify making a top 10 list. So I gave myself all year. I've now read over 30 books of Stephen King. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, you flatter me. I now feel that I can give you a definitive top 10 as of 2024. A few things I want to get out of the way before we get started. One, I often get asked to do tier rankings. I should tier rank every Stephen King book, short story that I've ever read. I am not going to be doing that anytime soon. I think the only time I will get to that video is when I finish every single thing Stephen King has ever written. Please don't plan on that video anytime soon. And secondly, probably the video that I get asked the most every single time I read a Stephen King book in a video or I mention Stephen King in a video, you all want to see me do a beginner's guide to Stephen King. Again, I feel that I haven't read enough Stephen King to justify a video where I give you advice on where to start. Personally, the obvious choice would just be starting at the beginning. Just start with his very first book and work in publication order. That ought to do the trick. Or if you're a little too timid to start from the beginning, there is a fantastic, probably the best Stephen King guide I have ever watched on the internet at Red Fury Books. Go over to his channel and watch his Stephen King guide. That man has read every single thing that Stephen King's ever written. To me, he's the quintessential Stephen King authority on BookTube. Go over to his channel, show him some love, show him some support, tell him Ian sent you. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get to the top 10. Editing Ian put like a little like 10, boom, with a sonic boom. You know what to do. Number 10 has to be Needful Things. Needful Things is not a book that I hear talked about often in Stephen King videos on BookTube. If it is talked about often, I'm just not seeing those videos. But that book is spectacular. Set in one of Stephen King's fictional small towns, a little curio shop opens up that coincidentally just so happens to have an item everybody in town would desire. The proprietor, Leland Gaunt, only asks that you pay for the items in question with the money that you have in your pockets. And a favor to be repaid upon request. This book gets chaotic fast. When Mr. Gaunt cashes in his favors to these individual townsfolk, I'm gonna say it, all hell breaks loose in Little Castle Rock, Maine, okay? I think Needful Things is a perfect picture of how Stephen King does psychological horror. It's not one of those horror novels that there's monsters and there's creepy crawlies waiting for you in every corner and there's things coming out of the closets or underneath the bed. It's more of a psychological brain twister of a horror novel. And I think Leland Gaunt, it probably has to be Stephen King's creepiest antagonist. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. If you're looking for a cozy, small little town that has a really bad weekend, Needful Things is for you. First one down, 9 more to go. I thought long and hard about this, but I think it has to go to The Green Mile. The Green Mile is a literary fiction book about Paul Edgecombe, who is superintendent of death row at Cold Mountain State Penitentiary. He and his crew of officers oversee the welfare and the subsequent executions of some of the most violent criminals of the state. One day, a man comes to the Green Mile convicted of killing 2 little girls and is sentenced to death. The story that then unfolds after that, oh my gosh, you have not known emotion until you've read The Green Mile. You do not know how to cry, how to weep until you've read this book. This is literary fiction with a heavy, heavy dose of magical realism, wrapped in some of Stephen King's best first-person prose, period. This book is beautiful from beginning to end, and the level of character work in this story, Stephen King, brother, you outdid yourself. Having now read it, I feel like it'd be an injustice to this book and to this video if The Green Mile had not been included. So that, my friends, is number 9. All right, number 8. I went back and forth between 2 books, and I just, I settled on both of them for the number 8 spot. Call me a cheater, that may be what I am, but deal with it. Number 8 has to be The Shining and Dr. Sleep. The fact that I can't pick between these two, they technically together tell a complete story. On one hand, The Shining is about the Torrance family that spend a secluded winter in the Rocky Mountains overseeing the Overlook Hotel. The father, Jack, is the caretaker there. He gets a job to spend the entire winter there with his family alone. He has to spruce up the place, but it just so happens the hotel is haunted. Yeah, Stephen King raises the stakes from your classic haunted house trope to let's just make a whole bloody hotel haunted. Pretty much the main character, the little son, Danny Torrance, just so happens to be a boy gifted and burdened with this ability known as the Shine. He can see dead people, and he can communicate telepathically with other people that have the Shine. It's probably Stephen King's most classic horror novel ever written. I think fans have dubbed it his scariest work. I beg to differ. The events that unfold in The Shining then are picked right back up with Dr. Sleep. You pick back up with Danny after the aftermath of The Shining. You go on a journey with him afterwards for like 20 years of his life. He becomes known eventually as Dr. Sleep. He helps people on their deathbed pass away with his ability. He doesn't kill them. I'm not saying that, but he helps ease their passing. I don't know, Dr. Sleep takes on a whole new life of its own from The Shining. I don't know, there's just the way Stephen King builds up to the end of Danny Torrance's story is just spectacular. And I think the books together make one solid, cohesive, beautiful story about good and evil, light and darkness, love, found family. And because I couldn't pick between them just shows how amazing they are together. So that's why I recommend reading them together, back to back, side by side. And that is also the reason why they both hold the number 8 spot. Oh, number 7. Wow, we are blazing along, are we not? Number 7 is Duma Key, the story of Edgar Fremantle. He gets into a severe accident on a construction site, loses one of his limbs, and as part of his rehabilitation, his doctor recommends that he relocate from cold, dreary Minnesota to the warm, sunny pallor of Florida. And what he does is he rents this picturesque little beach house on the remote Duma Key in the Gulf of Mexico. And there he takes up an old hobby of drawing and painting and gets back into art. The thing about Duma Key, it has a very dark and ghostly past. Wink, wink, hint, hint. And in classic Stephen King fashion, some of these works of art predict the future, and some of them control the past, and some of them come alive. This book unfolds at a slow burn pace, but boy, is it freaking worth it. I think Duma Key is probably one of Stephen King's masterclass examples of character work. I've yet to read character development quite like I read in Duma Key. The foundation of this story is horror because it does end up becoming a ghost story. I mean, I feel like I could go on and on about this novel, but let's go to number 7. Wait. We're on number 7. Let's go to number 6. It's gotta be Salems Lot. I read Salems Lot at the end of September, beginning of October. Yet another one of Stephen King's creepy little small towns in Maine. A town known as Jerusalem's Lot that's haunted by a dark past, where at the mysterious Marston house on the top of Marston Hill, or whatever freaking heck it's called, a grisly double murder occurred. This house has recently been purchased by a new and mysterious tenant. New and mysterious owner. I guess it's not a tenant. They're not freaking renting it. At the same time, author Ben Mears, who grew up in Jerusalem's Lot, comes back to write a book about a very traumatic experience that he had at the infamous Marston house. And it also just so happens that he's come in the nick of time because he helps discover that the town is plagued by vampires. Yes, it is a vampire story, and it's probably one of the best and most important vampire novels to be written in the last 50 years. You're not gonna convince me otherwise. And yes, it is way better than Twilight. Don't even get me started, YouTube. I went into it only knowing that it was about vampires, but I had no idea what I was in for. This book probably has one of Stephen King's scariest moments. After you read it, you really don't want to look out your window at night. It is insanely creepy. I think Stephen King does vampires in such a unique way. He doesn't try to copy the foundational stories like Dracula, but he also doesn't try to be anything excessively different different, like say, you know, I don't know, vampires that can survive in sunlight. What kind of crap is that? He sticks to the foundational mythos surrounding vampires. But I think of all things that make me love Salem's Lot the most is that it has very important ties to his magnum opus series, The Dark Tower. One of the main characters in Salem's Lot is also a main character near the latter half of the Dark series books. Yeah, if that didn't get you interested, it frickin' should. And so for that reason alone, I knew I had to read this book because I'm a huge fan of The Dark Tower. If you're wanting something excessively spooky, but also classically Stephen King, Salem's Lot, hands down, number 6. All right, number 5, man, rolling along here. Number 5 has to be Wizard and Glass. Wizard and Glass is the 4th novel in the Dark Tower series, and I can't really talk about it without giving much away. I mean, you pick up with Roland and the gang right after one of the best cliffhangers I think I've ever read. For the first 150 to 200 pages, it's like a non-stop, action-packed fantasy epic. I was so locked in when I read the beginning of this book. And then it takes a very subtle but serious turn. I think the next 600 pages is where you either love this book or you absolutely hate this book. The next 600 pages that unfold end up to be a backstory of our main character, Roland Shane. And some people don't like that he spent the majority of the book telling a backstory. I think it was this backstory and those 600 pages, honestly, Wizard and Glass itself, that made me into a Stephen King fan. I'd only read the Dark Tower series and I was kind of like, man, this guy's really good at telling stories. Yeah, I see why people like him. I hadn't read anything else but the Dark Tower. And then I read freaking Wizard and Glass. And from that moment on, I was like, this man is my favorite author. For that reason, Wizard and Glass stands at the number 5 spot. I hope I didn't give anything away, but gosh, Wizard and Glass is amazing. Number 4. I think some of you newer viewers are going to be a little bit confused, but some of you returning OG viewers aren't going to be all that confused when I tell you that number 4 is The Stand. If you have watched my top 10 books of all time, well, let's just say The Stand kind of takes the cake. If you haven't watched that video, I'm sorry, I just gave away like the major ending, whatever. That video's got plenty of views, it's okay. But The Stand is my favorite book of all time. But I know some of you are going, if it's your favorite book of all time, Ian, then why in the world is it at number 4? I don't know! I've been watching top 10 Stephen King book videos for, I don't know, months. And there was one particular booktuber that said The Stand was probably the best book he's ever read, yet it's not his favorite Stephen King. You know what? Yes, that's how I feel. The Stand, in regards to all of the fiction that I've ever read, is the best book I've ever read. But when it comes to Stephen King, there's only 3 books that top it. Guys, just don't make me explain it. Oh my gosh. But anyway, The Stand. Holy crap. The Stand. A virus takes over the world and kills off the majority of the population. In the 2020s, that hits a little too close to the chest. But anyway, the super flu known as Captain Trips causes a pandemic and takes out the majority of humanity. Those who have survived, they are now tasked with the rebuilding of civilization and the carrying on of the human race. This book starts with a pandemic and then ends with the battle for good and evil. Perfect, in my opinion, from beginning to end. Not a single, well, except for some of the sexual parts, you gotta cut that out. But oh my gosh, other than that, this book is absolutely gold. And it has another direct tie to the Dark Tower series in its antagonist. So if you want to see me read The Stand, here is a 24-hour readathon that I did for that book. But anyway, we gotta move on. Number 3 definitely has to be 11/22/63. Where to begin with this book? Historical literary fiction wrapped up in magical realism. We follow Jake Epping. I forget his last name. We follow a man named Jake, and he's given the rare opportunity to go back in time to try and prevent the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Yes, Stephen King, historical fiction, time travel. This book was brilliant. The amount of research that he pours into this novel, just the character work that he does within Jake and the side characters, the way he fleshes out the time travel aspects, he gives it rules, he gives it consequences, he makes it unique in comparison to other time travel tropes that I've read before. To cap it all off, he has probably his best romance ever written besides Wizard and Glass. Crying when I was supposed to cry, I was laughing when I was supposed to laugh, I was pissed when I was supposed to be pissed. Like, this book just had it all. And I think it has one of the best, if not his best, ending he's ever written. And if I've not convinced you to read 11/22/63, well, shame on me for doing a bad job as a booktuber. All right, the top two. This was very hard to pick between these two books, but I think I've narrowed it down. Book 2. It has to be Pet Sematary. Hands freaking down, it has to be Pet Sematary. The Creed family moves into this beautiful countryside home because the husband and father, Lewis, has a job as a doctor and a teacher at the University of Maine. What happens in this book is dark. The family learned that there's a pet cemetery on their property. It's where the community kids bury their pets because the road that they live on is a very busy road, so a lot of animals get ran over. They have this ceremonial burial ground for these pets. Stephen King makes this book a lot more than just a horror novel, which of course it is very much a horror novel. I would wager my opinion that Pet Sematary is probably Stephen King's scariest book. Do not go into this book lightly. This book explores grief in such a powerful way, a dark way, but a powerful way. It kind of poses a question like 1122, wherein 1122 asks, if you could go back in time and change history or change an event, would you? Pet Sematary poses the question, if you could bring anyone back from the dead, would you? This is one of Stephen King's shorter novels. I mean, he takes like 350 pages to take you on this very dark, very hopeless journey. I'm not gonna lie. You walk away going, maybe dead is better. Maybe dead is better. Maybe I should just stick with my grief and leave well enough alone. You're going into this book thinking, ooh man, Ian loves this book, I think I'm gonna love it. You probably would, but just be forewarned that this book is not easy. It is not an easy book. It is so heavy and dark. If you find a light at the end of the tunnel of that story, please let me know. I was gripped to the page. I probably read this book in like a day or two because of how well written this is. Probably one of the most haunting horror novels ever written. But enough said, it's time for number 1. Number 1 has to be It. It is my favorite Stephen King novel of all time. I don't even know if this book even needs me to talk about it, but I will. Set in another one of Stephen King's small towns, Derry, Maine. Honestly, a setting for a lot of Stephen King's most gripping and horrifying works. It is not the only place where Derry makes an appearance, but I think it is probably the most infamous story in this town. The population of this town is plagued by an entity that takes the form of a sinister clown, but it's not the adults that this thing is after, it's the children. And we follow not 1, not 2, not 3, but 7 main characters. 7 main POVs that each have an encounter with this evil clown and yet come together to battle for their lives and for each other and for their sanity. There's 2 main things that draw me to this book. Well, 3. But anyway, the first thing is probably the best example of a then-now timeline that I've ever read. And I know that's a very popular trope, especially among authors like, say, Riley Sager. Have this then-now timeline that you're following to kind of throw you off the scent. It's brilliant how Stephen King works these POVs together. At one point, you're following both of them in a climax. So you're getting simultaneous climaxes at the same freaking time. I've never read anything like that. The second thing that I love about this book, it's probably the best character work that Stephen King has ever done, and it's probably the best character work that I have ever read. I have yet to find a book that is so impressive, probably the most impressive characters I've ever read, because these children feel so real and so vulnerable and so broken. And then even in their adulthoods, the trauma that they carry over and the successes and failures that they experience, it just, all of it feels so real because it's not in a fantasy setting. These people are not removed from things that I know about. Mind-blowingly impressive. And then of course, the third thing that I would say, if I could say a third thing, and I can, it's my video, is that it has a major connection to, you guess it, The Dark Tower. It leaves me awestruck how many major novels he's written that have a tie to this series, and how when you read them all in a certain order, you get this beautiful, full, luscious picture of Stephen King's creativity at its absolute peak. And the fact that he does that when almost every novel is just, it's crazy. It's crazy. But anyway, it is my favorite novel by Stephen King. I'm not gonna lie, that was the hardest list I've ever had to make. I've never thought about a list longer and harder than this one. And let me know in the comments, if you have your top 10, please drop that in the comments. I wanna know what your top 10 Stephen King books are. And if you can't quite figure out a top 10, just give me your favorite, because I'm still on the Stephen King journey, like most people in my comment section, and I've yet to read everything by this man. I hope to one day. And then of course, when I finish reading everything, I'm gonna reread it all. So there you go. I hope this gets you guys excited for more Stephen King content in the future. If you're new to the channel, like and subscribe. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for your support. I love you guys. Oh yes, don't forget to go to Red Fury Books, give him a like and a shout out, and check out his Stephen King guide. Bye.